Wonderful. I think I want to start off by allowing each of you to sort of respond to the other. Kristin and I listened to Bowen's talk earlier, and you just heard the interview that we did, albeit brief. Maybe we could start with your impressions of what Zhou Bowen has said about JD's ambitions and how that fits into your scheme, and whether there are any flags that anything that he said might have raised in your mind. And then we'll turn around and ask Bowen to maybe critique or offer comment on what Kristin had to say.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. No, first of all, I also have to say I'm impressed. I mean, by the sense of how you can employ AI to incentivize consumers to optimize, so to say, the consumer experience. And as you've also said, I mean, the Chinese society is really very eager. You could say, in a sense, much more open sometimes, especially in comparison to Germans. We're still a bit more reluctant in terms of, wow, what is going to happen to our data? So China is a good laboratory in that sense, and you were also saying you're kind of thinking to also kind of explore Europe as a global market. And I think, again, this is something we could potentially looking forward to. But of course, from a European point of view, thinking about, as I said, our values in terms of privacy, data protection, this is something where we should have a conversation about, but I also really appreciated that you are, of course, aware of these issues. And I mean, we also know, you know this, Zhang Bowen, much better than I do, that Chinese customers themselves also ask more and more questions about privacy, data security. So I think a global company like JD.com, also for the sake of the Chinese customers, right, also would really take good care of privacy issues, of ethical issues when it comes to data management.
Okay, so we'll certainly bring that up as one issue that we want to dive a little deeper into, in data protection and privacy, in areas that are related to that in data security. What about your feelings about the presentation that you've seen?
Well, I think data privacy is a global concern. I think we saw more examples in US recently about Facebook and even Google. Their policy how to use data, and unfortunately, some bad cases happened. So needless to say, every company should be very, very sensitive about the privacy. And at JD, we are particularly treating customer privacy very, very seriously. So we actually using aggregated data, not individual data, to serve our customers, to provide better shopping experiences. But I agree that, like I mentioned earlier, this is a global ethos. We should join forces together to make sure, customers' privacy will be preserved.
So you don't keep individual records of individual transactions linked to individual accounts?
We do not use the data. We don't use that data. We only use aggregated data, and we also safeguard our data very, very, very carefully.
Okay. So far, no big data leaks have come out of JD.com. That's true. Alibaba has, and Financial have had some issues, but so far, no big data leaks. When I look at your talk, it seems to me that there are three major areas of concern. The first one I would sort of put in the bucket of competition, right? Economic competition. The second one is you described that in terms of data security, but you also mean sort of national security. You mean there's a worry that, for example, Huawei's presence in core networks in European countries could potentially compromise national security. And a third is values and institutions, right? So maybe, if that's a fair characterization of what you said.
Right.
Maybe we can ask Bowen, to talk about that. Are any of these even relevant in your mind to what JD hopes to do in Europe? Do you think that there's a values clash? Do you think are you competing directly with any European companies, or does anything that you do present anything like a national security concern for?
Like I said, JD's presence in Europe is only helping European brands enter into Chinese market. We import products from Europe to sell in China.
Right. So that doesn't seem like it has much. And so, you might be a different case then. But
Yeah.
I think the major concerns are around telco, right? Around exports of technologies that might be, for civil military fusion uses or dual purpose use technologies and things like that. So maybe we can ask you to address that question more broadly, if you think this is something you're in a position to talk about.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand why, but I mean, I think that in itself is an interesting.
No, well, in a sense, I also really would like to, support your question, of course, but also support Zhang Wen in saying, I think it's really important to differentiate these different kinds of narratives. When we talk about, companies like JD or Alibaba, the thing I pointed out to Alibaba with this initiative of kind of restructuring or to bringing a Chinese twist to a new potential regulatory framework for e-commerce, that's, again, a challenge in terms of our digital single market framework we have to tackle. But that just has to be totally kept separate, in a sense, from companies like Huawei or ZTE and the whole thing about critical infrastructure, smart cities. And again, I think also we have to be very precise here what we're talking about. Do we talking on a technical level? Then again, this is true for US companies, of course, too, like whoever builds a 5G network can also potentially access it, right? And if one has bad intentions, can also manipulate it. But the thing about Huawei and Chinese telecommunications companies is that there is a law in China, the National Security Law, which potentially asks Chinese companies in the case of national security interests, and this is very broadly defined in China, even broader than in the United States. It also even entails something like sustainable development, social stability. If something touches on national security in China, then Chinese companies abroad are asked to hand over data potentially also of European customers. So I think, but this is a totally different story from the technology issue, and again, it's a very different story from what companies like JD and Alibaba pursue, very legitimate in terms of commercial interests.
I take your point. A lot of people, point to this Article 7, but I think it's also maybe worth pointing out that those same people who say, point to this particular article are often the same people who say rule of law is meaningless in China. And yet here they are pointing to one particular law saying that, except in this one instance, right?
Right, but again, I think also what Zhang Wen has correctly pointed out, and you were also indicating that, Kaiser, I think when we talk about China, we really also have to differentiate between the Chinese government, the CCP, their interests, and the Chinese companies, also basically privately owned companies, which have sometimes a very, not conflicting directly, but some tensions, right, in terms of how to professionally manage business, how to professionally manage customer relations, and then Chinese society, Chinese customers themselves. So I think potentially the dangers and the questions we have in Europe is related to how the Chinese government, the CCP party state frames things, right? It's not so much, and also I know companies in China also struggle with that to some extent, right?
So that we can include Bowen in this,
Yeah,
and this doesn't
please.
really have. Why don't we talk about this question? You'll often hear people say, just sort of blithely, well, Chinese people don't really care about privacy. In fact, my old boss, Robin Lee, got in big trouble recently for saying something along those lines. Do you believe that's true? Do you believe that Chinese people care less about individual privacy, or do you think that? I think that's really especially relevant here. Maybe we can do a 3-point comparison. Here we're in the land that gave us GDPR and the right to be forgotten, that has sued Google successfully. This maybe represents one extreme pole. is China markedly different from Europe or from the United States in that regard?
Well, like I said, I think my observation is that in China, people do have a widespread eagerness to adopt new technologies. But I don't think that means people, don't concern about the privacy. Everybody does. Everybody does. But, like you mentioned, Europe, US, China, maybe elsewhere in the world, they all have different, plans or policy or rules, how we can balance, protecting privacy, which is extremely important, from, operation of a business, from encouraging technologies. So I think, I was wondering, between US and Europe, right? So the view is also quite different.
Yes, yes.
So what do you want to tell US companies having business in Europe about the privacy? What do you want to tell them about this?
No, right, and I mean the European Union, the European governments have made it very clear they have, and they reluctantly also do now, right? They have to apply it with the GDPR, right? Facebook and Google, I mean, they were also not saying, hooray, this is a good thing, of course, and honestly also a lot of European companies were saying, wow, is this not hampering innovation and business dynamics? But right, you're totally right, also with US companies, definitely, but they do it, and I think we also, in a sense, are more confident because, again, like the legal framework, there is of course a difference, but overall it's a rule of law state, right? There are also customer associations who also have a very strong grip and pressure, and also the media in the US, right? We don't have that much of an opportunity yet in China. But again, I'm also fully confident that the Chinese people and also potentially Chinese companies kind of drive that into the direction, right? I mean, this is also a whole topic, Kaiser, we have been also talking about this. I mean, it's impressive to me how positively technology in general is seen in China, right? And I mean, the Chinese society is very ready to embrace this, and maybe we're sometimes a bit too reluctant and overly cautious. And I also wanted to ask Bowen actually, why is that? Why are Chinese people they have such a positive, curious, open view towards new technologies and are so ready to link this? That's what Kaiser, what you said,
Yeah,
link it to progress and to progress and to a better way of life, right? There's a very positive attitude in China towards that.
As you know, only 18 months ago, I moved back to China. So my observation is quite limited on this regard. But, I think this, let me use the internet as an example, right? So when I was a kid in China, so majority of us do not have a phone, do not have, cell phones. Many of them skipped entire cell phone stage or PC stage to smartphones. So I think whereas I observe other parts of world, many of them are still using called non-smartphones those days, because I've been using this for a long while. So those users in China, they embrace mobile internet at a faster pace, at a bigger scale than anywhere in on this planet. So I think we have to admit that this kind of mobile internet give this generation of Chinese people huge convenience from almost everything, because
Sure.
E-commerce, ordering food, or watching movies, go make a reservation for your trip. Everything to do this on smartphones. So this, I think, is quite different from the rest of the world. Maybe that had some effects on that.
Bowen, what do you think Chinese should learn from looking at the way that digital technologies are regulated and managed here in Europe? Do you think that China should learn something from the discussion here around ethics, for example, around the potential pitfalls of artificial intelligence. Do you think that it's too cavalier, too sort of callous an attitude toward AI in China?
No, I think everybody I know in China really treats privacy very seriously. And the people talking about the GDPR and the companies actually study GDPR. I think there's no question about it. You know, AI or any technologies, when we build it, we want to build it for good, for the benefits of the society. So, like I mentioned earlier, it's just, you know, it's natural, like between Europe and the US, depending on the stage of what the technology is and depending on the perceived opinions of the society, different countries may end up with different policies at this point. But I think what we have in common is that we all agree, you know, as this, you know, what I heard from, my.
But do you hope to see them converge, or do you think that divergence is inevitable, or?
Well, I think there will certainly be paths I can foresee will be converging, and I also think it's totally acceptable. You know, people have made slightly different opinions on some paths.
I see.
Yeah.
And I'll turn the question to you, Kristin. Do you think that European regulators, entrepreneurs, large enterprises, should they be looking at the way things are done in China? For example, I know the allergy is worse in the United States, but there's a real allergy, there's a real revulsion at the idea of industrial policy, of any planning that's done around technology policy, where we look at China and its implementation of technology policy, and I can't figure out if we oppose it because we don't think it works, or we oppose it because we think it works too well. What should our posture be toward China's implementation of things like Made in China 2025?
Right, very, very good question. And I mean, at least in Germany, the discussion have just been kicked off by our economic minister, Peter Altmaier, by using that very same word. We maybe should think about an industrial policy, you know, more state-led approach to digital emerging technologies. And the initial reaction was like, wow, that sparked a huge controversy, because especially in Europe, we kind of have a huge emphasis, or I mean, it depends on the various European states, but normally would say, of course, it's first and foremost about the market, it's
right.
Market mechanism. Yes, I do think there is a realization that also, in order to not only looking at China, but also equally looking at the United States, that if we wanted to really have European solutions, not to be in a position to be forced to choose between US and Chinese solutions, we have to probably pool resources to create what we now say, for example, a data Airbus, right? More competitive, bigger companies, and that the state also should have a more active function. But again, this is a controversy.
So
this is just
an
right in time.
endorsement of industrial policy.
Let me put it that way. I mean, my personal opinion on that is, I'm also still kind of seeing the point, but I think again we have to be careful not to overdo it, to kind of not kind of. I would personally believe it still should be market-led, privately, company-driven. And I mean, when we look at Made in China 2025, there's also lately a bit of a controversy within China, right? People are also saying, wow, if you set the super ambitious targets, if you channel massive funding into that, but potentially also local governments misuse that of just creating a mega project, a super park, but then kind of using the rest of the money to invest into real estate and not really, right? So that's also, but I do believe there is clearly something to learn from China, and I hope I also made that clear. The strategic thinking, I think the Chinese government really understands much better than European government what this whole digitalization entails in the realm of the economy, society, and also like international politics, the military implication, to the better and to the worse. But again, first of all, you have to acknowledge they're very strategic about it, and that's something to acknowledge and to really also take it as a wake-up call for us here in Europe, saying, wow, better get our act together, let's start our homework.
And Bowen, do you think that in the media and from the politicians in the United States, do you think they overstate the extent to which Chinese companies benefit from government subsidies or from government planning? Do you think that your company, JD, benefits substantially from this?
Actually, I think JD is a public company listed in Nasdaq on Nasdaq.
Nasdaq listed.
Yes, and yeah, I think that's all I can tell you. I'm not in a good position to because I don't. It's a public company, and we are doing e-commerce,
right.
Serving our customers. So this is retailing. It's it's an industry. I don't think it will beyond my imagination. Any national interests will dictate retaining need to be done one way or another, right? So this is just for the benefit of society. People can shop whenever they want. I think that's all I can tell you.
So you're not aware of too much direct help that's been given to JD?
Not at all.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't imagine so. I think the e-commerce companies are doing just fine on their own. Are there any other comments that you have about It's a little bit difficult to have a conversation when we're talking about a quite specific company, and I understand the difficulty. There are a lot of questions about the broader political ramifications, things that you don't want to touch and aren't easy to talk about. So it's a little bit, apples and oranges here. But hopefully we've had some, we've delivered some insights, I think, about the way that technology, the ecosystem has developed, some of the challenges that it poses for European entrepreneurs and for European regulators, some of the very impressive ways in which artificial intelligence can be harnessed in something as ordinary as retail, and seen how that's worked. So I would love, I'm sure you'll stick around for a little while. If any of you in the audience have questions for our panelists, we can make ourselves available to talk about that. But I want to ask you to give a warm round of applause to Kristin Shi-Kupfer and to Zhou Bowen for taking the time to talk with us. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kaiser. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.